The first memory Elijah Carter ever trusted was the sound of his mother crying behind a locked bathroom door. He was 6, small enough that the world still felt taller than him, but old enough to know that when adults whispered, something bad had already happened. They had come home early that afternoon, his mother's face pale, her work uniform still on. She told him everything was fine, but her shaking hands betrayed her. That was the day the factory let her go. No severance. No apology. Just a cardboard box and a security escort. Elijah didn't understand layoffs or corporate restructuring, but he understood fear. He understood hunger. And he understood the way his mother's shoulders sagged like something precious had been taken from her. By the time Elijah was 8, his mother was gone. Not dead, just lost to exhaustion, illness, and a system that never gave her time to heal. Foster care swallowed him whole. New houses. New rules. New faces that never stayed long enough to matter. At night, he replayed memories of her hands braiding his hair, her voice promising things would get better. He learned early not to hope too loudly. Hope, he discovered, hurt more when it broke. Still, somewhere inside him, a quiet promise formed: he would never be powerless again. Elijah aged out of foster care at 18 with a trash bag of clothes and a social worker's handshake. No safety net. No family waiting. America was big and unforgiving, and he was invisible. He worked 2 jobs, then 3. Slept in his car. Learned numbers the way some people learned prayers. Money stopped being about comfort, it became protection. Each dollar was a brick in the wall he was building between himself and the past. College came by accident. A community program noticed his aptitude and offered him a chance. Elijah studied business, finance, and systems. How companies moved, how people were reduced to numbers on spreadsheets. Sometimes, during lectures, his chest tightened. He recognized the language. The same words that had cost his mother her job. Efficiency. Downsizing. Optimization. He took notes anyway. Knowledge, he told himself, was ammunition. Success didn't come fast, but it came relentlessly. Elijah launched a logistics startup from a rented room, solving problems no one else bothered to fix. Investors followed. Then money. With wealth came power, and with power came memory. Late at night, he researched the company that fired his mother. It still existed. Bigger now. Profitable. Untouched by the damage it had left behind. Buying the company wasn't revenge at first, it was curiosity. Then strategy. Then inevitability. When the board finally realized who their new majority shareholder was, the room went silent. Elijah felt no triumph. Just a strange calm. He had climbed high enough to look the past in the eye. But standing there, he realized something unexpected. Destroying them wouldn't heal him. The employees watched him closely. They expected layoffs. Punishment. Corporate bloodshed. That was the language they understood. Instead, Elijah listened. He walked the factory floors. Read employee files. Saw his mother's story repeated in dozens of lives. Good people one emergency away from ruin. The anger he'd carried for years softened into something heavier: responsibility. Elijah announced sweeping changes. Living wages. Emergency funds. Job protection policies. Executives pushed back. Shareholders panicked. He didn't budge. Profit that depends on suffering isn't profit, he told them. For the first time, the company felt like something more than a symbol of pain. It felt like a chance. Love came quietly. A social worker named Maya who partnered with his foundation challenged him in ways money never had. She saw through his armor. "You don't have to keep proving you deserve to survive," she told him one evening. The words stayed with him, unsettling and tender. The day Elijah stood before a room full of employees and announced family protection policies, he felt something break open inside him. Applause echoed, but it wasn't for him, it was for possibility. That night, he dreamed of his mother. She wasn't crying. She was smiling. And for the first time, Elijah believed that maybe, just maybe, he had won the right fight. The backlash came fast. Headlines questioned Elijah's competence, investors whispered about emotional leadership, and the board demanded measurable returns. He listened, calm but unmoved. Numbers had built his empire. They wouldn't dictate his conscience. Late nights returned, but they felt different now. He wasn't alone in his thoughts. Maya's voice lingered, reminding him that systems could be rewritten. That people didn't have to be collateral damage. A senior executive resigned publicly, calling Elijah naive. Stock prices dipped. Employees braced for reversal. Elijah held a town hall instead. He explained the long game: lower turnover, stronger loyalty, sustainable growth. Not everyone believed him, but enough did. Hope, once planted, spread quietly. Maya visited one of the factories with him. She spoke to families, listened to stories that mirrored Elijah's own. Watching her, he felt exposed. That night, over cheap takeout, he admitted his fear, not of failure, but of becoming the very thing he hated. Maya reached for his hand. "You already chose differently," she said. The first crisis tested everything. A single mother faced eviction after a medical emergency. Under old policies, she'd have been terminated. Instead, the company stepped in. Paid leave. Medical support. When the woman returned to work, eyes wet with gratitude, Elijah understood what real leverage looked like. Wall Street adjusted slowly. Analysts noticed retention rates climbing. Productivity followed. Profits stabilized. Elijah didn't celebrate. Victory wasn't a spike, it was consistency. Quiet proof that compassion could scale. A letter arrived addressed to his mother. It had been forwarded for years, finally finding him. Inside was an apology from a former supervisor who had stayed silent. Elijah cried for the boy he'd been. Then he folded the letter carefully and let the anger go. Romance crept in gently. Maya stayed over. Mornings became softer. He learned that intimacy required risk. No spreadsheets, no control. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future not defined by survival. The board proposed expanding the family protection model across subsidiaries. Elijah agreed, cautiously. Change, he knew, wasn't heroic, it was tedious. Meetings, policies, accountability. He committed anyway. A former foster kid joined the company through a new internship program. Watching the young man thrive, Elijah felt time bend. This was the echo he wanted to leave. On the anniversary of his mother's firing, Elijah stood outside the old factory at dusk. He didn't feel rage, only resolve. He whispered thank you to the woman who taught him endurance, then turned toward the life he was finally building. National media arrived with bright lights and sharper questions. Reporters framed Elijah as an experiment, proof or warning. He answered carefully, refusing sound bites that flattened human lives into trends. After one interview, he felt the old tightness return. Maya squeezed his hand. "Tell the truth," she said, "even when they don't print it." A class action lawsuit surfaced from former employees terminated under old policies. Lawyers advised settling quietly. Elijah insisted on something else: acknowledgement. The company apologized publicly and created a restitution fund. The apology cost less than the silence would have, but meant more. Pressure cracked the board. One director leaked emails to the press, painting Elijah as reckless. Betrayal stung, but it clarified loyalties. Elijah learned that leadership wasn't about being liked, it was about being consistent. Maya hesitated when he talked about expanding the foundation nationwide. She feared he was replacing rest with righteousness. They argued, softly but honestly. It ended not with agreement, but understanding, a new muscle for both of them. A pilot program in Ohio cut eviction rates among employees' families in half. Data met dignity. For the first time, Wall Street applauded. Elijah felt uneasy at the praise, wary of motives that shifted with profit. Elijah visited his last foster home. The house looked smaller. The pain felt manageable. He funded scholarships quietly, without press. Healing, he learned, didn't need witnesses. The company's annual meeting opened with an employee speaking, not an executive. Her story moved the room. Elijah watched investors stand to clap. Culture had changed. Slowly, irreversibly. Maya received an offer out of state. Opportunity tugged at both of them. They promised not to shrink themselves to fit fear. Love, they agreed, should expand life. A recession loomed. Advisors urged cuts. Elijah chose restraint over retreat, temporary executive pay reductions, protected wages. Risk returned, familiar but steadier. On a quiet Sunday, Elijah cooked breakfast for Maya. No headlines. No meetings. For the first time, happiness felt ordinary, and that made it extraordinary. The recession tightened its grip. Orders slowed, margins thinned, and every decision carried weight. Elijah felt the old survival instincts flare, urging him to cut fast and deep. Instead, he chose transparency. Weekly briefings replaced rumors. Fear eased when people were trusted with the truth. Maya accepted the out-of-state role temporarily. Distance entered their lives like a question neither could fully answer. They learned how absence could sharpen love or expose its cracks. Some nights were harder than board meetings. A union organizer approached Elijah, wary but hopeful. This company's history made promises suspect. Elijah surprised them both by supporting collective bargaining. Power, he believed, was safer when shared. Profits dipped again. Commentators called the company stubborn. Then competitors began bleeding talent. Elijah watched the market slowly reward patience. A stroke of bad luck, an industrial accident injured 3 workers. Old ghosts resurfaced. Elijah shut down operations temporarily, absorbing losses. Safety over speed. Always. At the hospital, he met families who reminded him of his own childhood visits. Fear smelled the same everywhere. He stayed until visiting hours ended. Leadership, he learned, was presence. Maya returned for a long weekend. They talked about children, about roots. Elijah admitted he was scared to build what he'd never had. Maya kissed his fear without trying to fix it. The board approved a profit-sharing model. It wasn't unanimous. Elijah expected resistance. What surprised him was pride, his own quiet and steady. The internship program expanded nationally. Applications flooded in from kids aging out of foster care. Reading their stories felt like reading alternate versions of himself. One evening, Elijah found his mother's old recipe notebook in storage. He cooked her soup. As steam filled the kitchen, grief softened into gratitude. The past no longer ruled him, it accompanied him. A federal committee invited Elijah to testify about labor reform. Cameras followed him into marble halls that felt colder than factory floors. He spoke plainly about incentives, dignity, and the cost of instability. Afterwards, aides praised his restraint. Elijah felt only the weight of expectation. The company received an acquisition offer large enough to erase every risk. Advisors urged acceptance. Elijah stalled. Selling felt like surrendering the people who trusted him. Wealth without stewardship felt hollow. Maya moved back permanently. They unpacked boxes together, deciding which lives to keep and which to release. That night, Elijah proposed quietly, without spectacle. She said yes like it was the most natural thing in the world. A scandal erupted at a rival firm. Mass layoffs disguised as restructuring. Media compared responses. Elijah refused commentary. Compassion didn't need contrast to justify itself. An old foster brother reached out, bitter and struggling. Resentment hovered between them. Elijah offered help without conditions. Some wounds, he learned, reopened before they healed. The board split over rejecting the acquisition. Votes tied. Elijah broke the tie by stepping down as CEO, remaining owner and steward. Leadership, he believed, could rotate, values should not. A successor rose from within, once an assembly line worker. The transition steadied nerves. Elijah felt lighter, like a man who'd set down armor he no longer needed. The foundation launched housing partnerships nationwide. Evictions dropped. Children stayed in schools. Elijah watched statistics turn into futures. On a walk through the city, Maya asked what winning meant now. Elijah answered without hesitation, not being afraid to love what I build. At their small wedding, employees stood beside politicians and foster kids alike. Elijah realized his life no longer pointed backward. It pointed forward, wide and open. Married life settled into something sturdy and warm. Mornings were slower. Decisions felt shared. Elijah learned that fulfillment wasn't a peak. It was a rhythm built from ordinary care. The new CEO invited Elijah to a quarterly review. The company was profitable, stable, and humane. Elijah felt pride without ownership. This was how institutions outlived founders. Maya became pregnant unexpectedly. Fear returned, sharp but brief. Elijah placed his hand on her belly and promised not perfection, but presence. A national magazine requested a legacy interview. Elijah declined the cover. He suggested featuring employees instead. Stories mattered more than faces. Their child arrived early on a rainy night. Holding the baby, Elijah felt time collapse. He whispered his mother's name, not in grief, but in gratitude. Years passed gently. Housing programs expanded. Foster youth graduated college. Elijah watched success compound quietly, like interest earned through patience. On a visit to the old factory, now modernized, Elijah met workers who didn't know his story. That anonymity felt like freedom. His foster brother stabilized, slow and uneven. Trust rebuilt inch by inch. Elijah learned that not every rescue was dramatic. Some were simply staying. At a foundation event, a young man thanked Elijah for saving his family from eviction. Elijah corrected him softly. "You saved yourselves. We just stood in the way of harm." On a quiet evening, Elijah sat on the porch with Maya and their child asleep inside. He thought of the company he bought to avenge the past, and the life he built to protect the future. For the first time, he felt complete.